Hello, everybody. So, as you probably know, I'm at a retreat this week, and which is why there wasn't a service last week. And I wanted to record a Dharma talk for this week. And you can still do all the chanting and stuff and meditate. You have the PDF to work from, so you're free to do that. But I've been thinking a lot about the idea of spiritual community lately. And, partly because we're thinking about going in person again and thinking about the idea of developing a more tangible spirit online community, virtual community, and that sort of thing. Then I started thinking about what it takes to make a community and what makes a community a good one. And, the community at White Sands Buddhist Center, I think, is a very good example of a good spiritual community. And, it's not perfect. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But, it's people always talk about how friendly and welcoming it is. And I think that in terms of bringing people together and bringing them the Dharma, it does an extremely good job. And so, the triple gem, the ideals in which we take refuge, include spiritual community as one of the jewels. And this is important. The community is a place one goes to practice and to find support for others who are practicing along with them. And communities, even spiritual communities, are made up of human beings. And human beings are all flawed. It's sort of part of the definition, part of the karma. And so it's kind of interesting. The spiritual community is a place where people share spiritual objectives and come to guide and be guided. And part of that inevitably will include navigating conflict and dealing with humans. And humans are perfectly imperfect. So I'm going to talk about a couple of discourses today that I hope will give you some ideas on how to incorporate human interaction into your practice. There are several stories about the Buddha and some of his key monks who very skillfully responded to people who were quite challenging at times, very difficult. And one of them, the title of the sutra is the Akosa Sutta. And Akosa basically means rude. So the Buddha was staying in a monastery, and there was a Brahmin who lived nearby. And this Brahmin's wife heard the Buddha's teachings and became a devoted follower. And she would sometimes quote the Buddha and praise his teachings, and sometimes in front of her husband and their friends and stuff. And, Brahmins were the priests. And so they were supposed to be in charge of the spirituality, and her husband would not be happy about the fact that she was, bringing in stuff from sort of outside the culture. So he went to see the Buddha, and he engaged him in debate about spiritual matters. And he ended up so impressed with the Buddha and with what he heard from him that he asked the Buddha to ordain him. So this Brahmin had a brother named Akosaka, which basically means the insulting or the rude. So he was Akosaka of the Bharadwaja clan, or so Bharadwaja the rude. And he got mad when he found out that his brother had ordained and become a Buddhist monk. And so he went to see the Buddha too. He's also going to argue. And true to his name, he began insulting and cursing the Buddha. Well, the Buddha just sat there calmly, and that bugged him. He wanted an argument, but the Buddha said, "Brahman, do friends and relatives come to visit you sometimes?" And the Brahmin said, "Well, of course that happened." The Buddha said, "Well, when they visit, do you offer food, snacks, delicacies, things like that?" The Brahmin said, "Well, sure, I serve treats and delicacies of various kinds." And the Buddha said, "Well, do they always eat everything that you offer?" "Well, no, of course not. They don't eat everything." "So what they don't accept, to whom does that food belong?" "Well, whatever they don't accept, Master Gotama, those foods are still mine. They stay with me." The Buddha said, "Well, likewise, you have offered insults to one who is not insulting. You've cursed one who does not curse you, and you have disparaged one who is not disparaging. I don't accept these offerings. They remain yours. One who returns insults to someone who is insulting, curses one who curses, disparages one who is disparaging. Those could be said to be eating together and sharing company. But I'm not sharing with you, Brahman. That stuff is all yours. And the Buddha went on to say that you make matters worse when you flare up at someone who's angry. Whoever doesn't flare up at someone who's angry wins a hard battle, he said. You live for the good of both, your own and the others. When knowing that the other is provoked, you mindfully grow calm. And hearing this, Akasaka Bharadvaja praised the Buddha's words. He said, just as if he were to show the way to one who was lost or to carry a lamp into the dark so one could see, so Master Gotama reveals the truth. And he went for refuge right then and there, asked for ordination, and not too long after that became enlightened himself. So this makes it sound like the instruction is, well, just don't get angry. Someone is rude to you, just be calm. And that's really kind of a challenge. That's difficult. We're human beings. We're going to respond sometimes in ways similar to that. But, understanding that that anger is not helpful, that to flare up at someone who is already flared up is just going to make the situation hotter. But it's easier if you think in terms of developing goodwill and compassion. So I'll share you another one. I'll unpack this one a little bit as I go along. So this is called the Saraniya Sutta, conducive to amiability. And I'm using the translation from Thanissaro Bhikkhu. He said, monks, these 6 are conditions that are conducive to amiability, that engender feelings of endearment, feelings of respect, leading to a sense of fellowship, a lack of disputes, harmony, and a state of unity. Which 6? There's the case where a monk is set on bodily acts of goodwill with regard to his fellows in the holy life, to their faces and behind their backs. This condition is conducive to amiability. The monk is set on verbal acts of goodwill with regard to his fellows in the holy life. Third, the monk is set on mental acts of goodwill with regard to his fellows in the holy life. Furthermore, whatever righteous gains the monk may obtain in a righteous way, even if only the alms in his bowl, he does not consume them alone. He consumes them after sharing them in common with his virtuous fellows in the holy life. This condition is conducive to amiability. Furthermore, with reference to the virtues that are untorn, unbroken, unspotted, liberating, praised by the wise, leading to concentration, the monk dwells with his virtue in tune with that of his fellows in the holy life, to their faces and behind their backs. This condition is conducive to amiability, feelings of endearment, respect, fellowship, lack of disputes, harmony, and a state of unity. And last, with reference to views that are noble, leading outward, that lead those who act in accordance with them to the right ending of suffering and stress. The monk dwells with his views in tune with those of his fellows in the holy life. These are the 6 conditions that are conducive to amiability, engender feelings of endearment, feelings of respect, leading to a sense of fellowship, a lack of disputes, harmony, a state of unity. So he's addressing these to monks, as you heard, but it's still relevant to all of us, whether we're monks or not. It applies to the spiritual community because that's our place of practice and the people that we're practicing with. He's talking about amiability in the spiritual community, but this includes the larger community. If you're a Mahayana Buddhist like I am, you see Buddha nature in all things. So what's your spiritual community? We believe that we're practicing for the benefit of all beings. Therefore, all beings are your spiritual community. Now, so what does it mean to be amiable? Endearment, caring for others, loving others, and that sort of love your neighbor sense of the term. Respect. What does respect mean? It means being aware, helping preserve the dignity of others and acknowledging that all human beings are worthy of respect, worthy of have inherent dignity, and that sort of thing, worthy of our care and concern. Fellowship. That's an interesting question. This evolution Buddhist fellowship. What does fellowship mean? I don't know that I've ever really talked about that. But it means being aligned in your goals and values in a friendly association. So, not just being aligned in goals and values, a corporate mission statement can do that, but in an association that is friendly. We like seeing each other and we like practicing together and we share goals and what we're doing. Lack of disputes. Now, that doesn't mean an absence of conflict. It means that when there's a conflict, we work together. We're not at odds with one another. Nobody's trying to win, trying to resolve problems, create solutions. Harmony. Harmony is interesting. So when you're harmonizing, if you're a musician, you play different notes. You don't play all the same notes. That's not harmony. That's unison, which has its value. But in harmony, there'll be two different sounds, but they work together to make something more beautiful than either of them alone. And so they complement and fit with one another and then even enhance one another. And that's within the context of a community. Harmony is like the ideal. Unity means you're aligned in mission and objectives. You're really here for the same purpose. You come here for the same purpose that we all come together for. So then he says bodily acts of goodwill. That's how you develop this. So what does this mean? So goodwill, the word, we chant the Metta Sutta every week. And then we chant, may I be happy and well, may no harm come to me. May I learn compassion. So the Metta Sutta says, in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. That's what that thought means. That's what metta means. I have that desire that all beings be at ease, glad, and safe. So we're wanting others to be free from oppression, to be, have what they need in order to maintain a healthy life and so on. And so bodily acts of goodwill would mean that our physical actions have their well-being in mind, to keep others free from harm, encourage their safety and their happiness. So when you go for refuge as a Buddhist, what do? You take the 5 precepts: refrain from killing, from stealing, from engaging in harmful speech, and that sort of thing. So taking the precepts and keeping them is an act of goodwill. I'm protecting others from harm, at least from harm from me, by doing this. But it goes beyond just refraining from causing harm too. We're helping others practice. Spiritual community, we do that. We support one another in our practice. That can include giving. If you go to church, they pass the plate. You contribute to the ongoing success of the church. Paying the bills and keeping the lights on, all that kind of stuff. That's an act of generosity that supports the community. But also being generous with your attention. Supporting others in whatever way you can. There's people who show up at White Sands, using them as an example. There's people who come in early and put out tables and chairs for the people so that people have a place to sit when they come there for lunch. There's people who show up early and put out the cushions for people to sit on. And there are volunteers that come in and run the PowerPoints and all those things. Those are all acts of goodwill to help support the spiritual community. And then he says verbal acts of goodwill. So not using harsh, critical language, not wasting time with gossip, using kind speech. So if you're going to say something, even something, maybe sometimes things need to be corrected, or maybe you don't agree with how something is being done, or you think that something could be done better. How do you present that? If you present that from a place that has in mind the well-being and happiness of others, then that's going to come across in the way you say it, probably. You don't need no judging or criticizing the person. You can focus on the action. Judging an act is different from judging a person. Think about this. You say, I don't like what you did, versus I don't like you. And a lot of the time what people hear, even if you're asking for a correction in behavior, if you're not doing it right, they're going to hear, I don't like you. Not that the action was wrong, but you're bad. So that's, you just have to be careful about that. Mental acts of goodwill. So that means thinking in a way that is contributing toward the well-being of others. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't have an angry thought arise, but say a thought might arise that someone is foolish. Now, if that was true, if they were really a fool, they could only do foolish things. We all do foolish things from time to time, and that doesn't make us fools. We all do smart things from time to time. That doesn't make us geniuses either, you know. But the thing is, mental actions should be realistic. They should direct away from generalizing about the person to having their well-being at heart, their non-harm. So if you direct your thoughts toward benefit and well-being, that'll work. See, somebody came up to me and said, Sensei Morris, I used to have a lot of trouble with anger. And he said, now, when I get mad at somebody, I just look at them and think, may you be happy and well. And that anger goes away. And it does. It'll go away. It's very interesting. It's very hard to wish someone well and be angry at them at the same time. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't hold people accountable for doing harm to others. Doesn't mean that you have to just live with people's mistakes or whatever. You can do what you need to do to manage the situations you're in. But if you have others' well-being at heart, that will go more smoothly. He says, to their faces and behind their backs. So do these things, bodily, verbal, and mental acts of goodwill while in contact with others and when they're not around. Not just during actions, but all the time. So this practice is not just for the other people. It's for your own benefit. Remember when we chant, may I be happy and well, may no harm come to me, may I learn compassion. So learning compassion is a two-part process. Part of it is to be aware that we are recipients of compassion. If you're going to a temple or if you're logging on to a virtual community, anything like that, these things happen because people care about you enough that they want to help you awaken. That's an act of compassion. So being aware of that. But it's more than just that. There are many, many daily activities that help us live. Even the air we breathe is here because of some other living thing. And so we may not think about it. We may not think about the trees as being compassionate, but we live in this world that supports us. And so that is an act of, we are the recipients of compassion that way. But developing goodwill and compassion are spiritually liberating. We cannot awaken without compassion. Somewhere back there behind me, there's these two sticks you clap together. One of them says wisdom, the other says compassion. They're two parts of the same practice. You can't have one without the other. Sharing righteous gains in a righteous way. So he's talking about monks going on alms rounds, probably, presumably. And, even that needed to be done in a certain way in accordance with the Buddhist teachings. We can say righteous. Sometimes it sounds like judgmental. I'm a righteous person. That means, but it really means that we're aligning our actions with our values, with our highest values. So done in accordance with one's vows and with the Dharma, the Buddhist teachings. So in those days, basically monks went on alms rounds and they received alms and they gave Dharma talks. It's not a tit for tat, it's not a transaction. It's not, if you'll feed me, I'll talk to you. Or on the other hand, if you'll talk to me, I'll feed you. If somebody came and asked for the Dharma, you gave it to them. And people who wanted to support the spiritual community gave alms. And that still happens in much of the world. If you go to a lot of countries in Southeast Asia, there's monks that walk down the street in the morning with their alms bowl, and there's people who line up to support them. Like I said, it's not transactional. We give the teachings freely. As I said at White Sands, we don't sell tickets to this. Anybody who comes in can do the chanting and the meditation and hear the Dharma talk. Your gifts should also be given freely, not because you feel an obligation, but because you recognize the benefit of what's going on, you want to support it, so you give. So, but it also supports our physical environment. If we want to live in a kind world, we practice kindness. If we want to live in an enlightened world, we live an enlightened life. I mean, that's just the way it works. And so, um, sharing righteous gains means I make my living in a way that's in line with the precepts. I don't go to work to steal from people or to cheat people. I don't work for one of those companies that calls people up and tries to rip them off with, whatever the equivalent of aluminum siding is these days. And we're honest with people in our dealings. I mean, that would be making a living in a righteous way. And we recognize the degree to which we owe a lot of our livelihood to the world that we're in. And so we can, we share what we get. And it says, dwells with his virtue in tune with that of his fellows in the holy life. So the holy life doesn't have to just mean the monastic life. It doesn't mean you have to give up everything and go off and live in a monastery. To the extent you can, you live an enlightened life. So he mentions the virtues. There's the 6 virtues to be perfected. Dana, generosity, as I mentioned before. Sila, moral restraint, as I mentioned before. Kshanti, patience. Being patient with others, and being patient with ourselves, and being patient with the results of our practice. If we expect to take some time to do things, and then we'll see the results of that. But it takes patience. And the other side of that is diligence. Keep going. That's Koyo Kabose's favorite turning word. Keep going. Sometimes you get obstacles in your practice. Sometimes you're at a monastery and somebody's rude to you. Keep going. So, well, I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Jhana, concentration. That's the 5th perfection. As we practice with meditation, that's the obvious thing, but also keeping our mind set on our highest goals. And finally, prajna, wisdom, seeing reality as it is and living in accordance with that. So recognizing what truly causes suffering, excuse me, and then resolving to live in a way that transcends that cycle. So, I was talking about meditation a second ago. When we meditate, we sit down, we close our eyes, or we're in a darkened room, focus our gaze somewhere or whatever. Let our minds get quiet. And then what happens? Noises come in from outside. Feelings arise in the body. Thoughts come up. All of those things happen. And because we're meditating and we're concentrating on that, we're focusing on that, we can be selective about what we do with those thoughts. We learn to be non-reactive, and and then we develop those skills, and we can apply those skills in day-to-day life when we're not meditating. I probably talked about this a few thousand times. You might have an anxious thought arise, and you don't have to chase after that, or an angry thought, and you don't have to chase after that. You can be selective about it. In a spiritual community, you have this sort of microcosm of the greater community. Of course, you're going to encounter rude people, because sometimes people are rude. You're going to encounter people who do foolish things or do the wrong thing or make mistakes, all those things, because you're dealing with human beings, and human beings are flawed. And, unless you're sitting around in a room full of Buddhas, which would probably be, fully awakened Buddhas, that is, that you're gonna encounter some very non-Buddha-like behavior, probably. But we're in this context where, okay, we're focusing on our practice, and it's relatively easy, because most of the conflict you're going to encounter in a spiritual community is going to be fairly mild compared to what you might encounter at work, or hanging out in the park during a festival or something like that. So, and It's this period of time where you're kind of quieting your mind and you're focusing your mind on what are your most important values. And so it allows you, just as meditation allows you to be more aware of what arises in your mind, it allows you to be more aware, ardent, alert, and aware what arises in your, in your community, in and around you. And so it gives you this point of focus for your practice. And so whatever comes up, just make it a part of your practice. Well, anyway, I hope this was helpful. I hope it didn't come across too preachy. I'm not like mad at anybody for not, it says, but I was actually talked about this at White Sands, and I got so many comments about it afterward, about what good timing it was, and and that sort of thing. I thought, I should talk about this on YouTube too. And I was a little worried that they would think that I was beating up on them because but I wasn't. It's really a very friendly community, and this community has that same quality frequently. And even though it's sometimes I look and see that there's a couple hundred people who've watched one of these, and I don't even know who they are, but still, I hope that whatever you're bringing to this, and then whatever you're taking away from this, is that you keep this idea in mind of bringing your spiritual community and the goodwill that arises as a result of it to the rest of your life. Okay. So thank you very much for your attention. I look forward to being back live with you next Wednesday. And Brandon will be leading the meeting this Thursday on the Shobogenzo. So I hope you enjoy that. Kind of sorry, I'm going to miss it. It's a very interesting chapter. And so I look forward to hearing your reports on how that went. And I'll see you again soon. Friends, I respectfully remind you, life and death are of supreme importance. Time swiftly passes by and opportunity is lost. Each of us must strive to awaken. Awaken. Take heed. Do not squander this life.